Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Monday, July 24th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you on this Monday. We're going to dig into a whole bunch of topics. One of them is a bit 3-0-y in nature. Big change atop the AL East. We'll talk about the Rays and the Orioles and some of the issues facing those teams as they look ahead to potential postseason runs. Having a little fun with the past calendar year leaderboard. I got a lot of mailbag questions to get to along the way as well. Eno, how's it going for you on this Monday?
It's good. It's good. We had a good weekend this weekend. Some birthday parties and yeah, for the adults even.
Oh,
Yeah.
real nice.
Yeah, it's nice to go to an adult party. Now we're doing the thing that sort of Mad Men style. The kids are just, I joke that we had this whole thing where we went to open plan in all our houses, and a lot of it was like, oh, I need to be able to watch the kids while I'm cooking dinner, but also just to make the most out of the space we had so that you just open it all up and you feel like, oh, it feels much grander when I combine my kitchen and my dining room, right? And so I think we went through a lot of that, but then it's also nice to have like a door to shut and put the kids in a separate space. And so they had, my friends have done a renovation where their garage is now like a unit. And we just stuck all the kids in the garage and closed the door. And we're like, thank you. The adults are going to hang out in here now. You guys figure it out in there.
Thunderdome.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll ever have a trend where we go back and we have all the Property Brothers and on HTV and they're going back in. Let's close this up and give you some more privacy in here.
You know
Let's
what?
put a door here.
I think there's a chance that could become a trend because not everybody, but a lot of people have shifted to working from home over the past couple of years, right? And because everybody had
dining room
cubicles,
working, be like, shut up.
yeah, everyone's going to want to enclose their spaces more because it's the opposite of what they wanted before because of having to work at home. So I think there could be something to this. I'm on a tear here in July, much like Jackson Churio. I had Culver's 3 times in the first 8 days that it was a possibility. As soon as I crossed the border into Iowa and saw the first one, that was my
Put
lunch
it in
on the
my
drive back.
veins.
Yes, and like I've settled in. I've gone 4 days without it now, so I think I'll get back to my pre-California like once a week or every other week sort of routine. Because
What's so great about Culver's?
it's just like it's kind of just the junk food I grew up on, right? It's smashed burgers, the butter burger is what they call it. But the other stuff on the menu is pretty good too. Chicken tenders, buffalo tenders. If you love custard, thick ice cream, they got great shakes, stuff like that too. But some people like their cheese curds. I think if I'm going to commit to cheese curds, there are so many other places
on the
to get
menu
it.
at a hamburger place. That's interesting. That's different.
Yep, I actually like the onion rings more than the fries and the cheese curds there. So it's back in my life. There's one very close to where I live.
Onion rings are underappreciated, dude.
They are
Underrated. And they're not on they're not on any other menus.
They don't have them at In-N-Out. They don't have them at Five Guys. Yeah,
It's not a
Shake
McDonald's
Shack. I
or
don't know if they
Burger
have them.
King. Maybe Shake Shack. They have some options.
Yeah, there's a couple other places that have them, but it's not everywhere. It's not automatic. So that's what I've been doing, just tearing up junk food. And I did move my desk. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see there's a corner behind me now. There's nothing on the walls yet because I'm in the phase of the move where I have to basically rotate a room full of boxes to get something where it goes, and then I have to unpack the next box. And yeah, it's just one time. So I'm getting closer.
And also, you're trying to, by putting yourself in the corner, you're showing us the only clean part of the room.
Yes, exactly. And I gave myself 2 walls to put nice photos and things on too. So it's getting there. It's slower progress. And the good thing, of course, being back home, close to family, we get to visit with people all weekend, which means I got nothing done in my office. So, life goes on. It's good to see people again.
Do the tour.
Yeah. Into the topics we go. The 3-0-y topic on my mind. The Rays no longer atop the AL East. The O's passed them. They took 3 of 4 over the course of a weekend series. The Rays have actually been in a kind of a prolonged slump as a team. They're now 10-20 in their last 30 games. So they're kind of hanging out with the Rockies, the Pirates, the Royals, and the A's during that span. Not really the company you'd expect them to be in. I don't think anything's actually...
What's been the problem?
Yeah, I don't know if anything's actually wrong, but remember when everything they did in April was just ridiculous? The way they opened the season on that incredible winning streak, and every single player on the team was up in barrel rate and getting to power at a level we really hadn't seen before. That cooled off as
Yeah, but
expected, but it went like more, it went like well below average for a lot of guys for a stretch.
I guess, but if you look at Tampa as a team, in the last 30 days, they're third in WRC plus.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as great as it was. So I would just wouldn't blame the lineup is all I'm saying. Let me see if it's the starter's fault. Whose fault is it? Tampa Bay third in WAR in starters. Oh, it's the relievers, isn't it? Oh, look at this. Oh, look at this. 26th in bullpen WAR over the last 30 days.
Mm, that'll
Hmm.
do it. That's a
And
team that
I
uses its bullpen a lot too.
and I would say that like just from my appraisal of this bullpen from afar, and sometimes, combing through it, I like Jason Adam and Peter Fairbanks. I think Robert Stevenson is pretty good. This is not as quality a bullpen as it's been in the past. Like they've had better bullpens than this.
That's fair. But of all the problems they could have, this is a pretty correctable one on the fly. We're starting to see the minor trades happen. Atlanta picked up a couple of
I mean,
relievers.
you knew they thought it was a little bit of a problem if they go get Robert Stevenson in an actual trade in like a month ago, you know?
Yeah, Pete Fairbanks has missed some time with injuries this year, so they were already playing one short. But Pete Fairbanks' injury history also is one that you're fully aware of if you're the Rays. It's part of how you got him in the first place. I think it's surprising to me that Luis Patino hasn't worked out yet as a reliever. Like there's a handful of things that you could have looked at depth wise with them and said, okay, like this happens here, this moves up into this role, we'll move this guy into this spot, and we'll be close to what we normally are. If the lineup is hitting, if the starting pitching is healthy, and they're able to go out in these next 8 days and add a couple more relievers, they could still be the dangerous team they always are come October,
It does
right?
look like, I mean, Ohtani kind of faith casting aside, I think. I mean, it does look like this would be the easiest way for them to add to their team. And the nice thing is that like they're not looking at a lineup where they're like, most years you want to be like, get them a big bat, any big bat, and that's when they make mistakes. Maybe. I mean, the Nelson Cruz trade, Joe Ryan, is that one of their biggest mistakes?
Yeah, I mean, they certainly could benefit from having Joe Ryan right now, right?
Yeah,
Who wouldn't?
right. Who wouldn't? But in improving the bullpen is something that the Rays would do real easily. And I think that the Ohtani thing is pretty crazy nuts. I mean, I think the most likely thing right now with the Angels at 51-49 is actually that Ohtani stays home.
The lineup actually has slumped a little bit, though. Even though Yandy Diaz and Isak Paredes have been great in the last 30 days, Luke Raley has continued to hit. Brandon Lau has been fine when healthy from a WRC plus perspective, but Wander has been relatively quiet over the last 30 days. Randy Arozarena has been pretty quiet over the last 30 days, and those are two guys that you expect to be pretty far above league average on a regular basis. So I think that's part of it. It's not all of it, but they're still very good. I don't look at this Rays team and say it's time to panic or anything like that. Stevenson's been fantastic in the last 30 days, 41.4% K minus BB percentage. He has been lights out. What an addition for them, getting him in that minor trade with the Pirates.
And they did make a change with him. I was looking at it. I forget now what it was. I think it was a pitch mix change. Let me see here.
I thought Stevenson made sense back in draft and hold season as the next option up if anything happened to David Bednar, or if Bednar had a setback with a back injury that gave him some trouble a season ago. I really thought that was going to work out great for the Pirates. I was surprised when they moved away from Stevenson as quickly as they did.
Yeah, he stopped throwing his slider so much. It's a cutter now for Stevenson. I think it's a little bit similar to what his slider was, but his slider was like 84, 85. His cutter is 89. And his cutter has it basically they converted his slider to a cutter. And in terms of usage, right now, the cutter is 71%. He in his last start in his last appearance, Stevenson threw the cutter 71% of the time. So yeah, he's taken to this new slider, this new cutter that he throws. Yeah, and it's it's so funny. God, man, the Rays, dude, I would be so annoyed. Like, like if you're Pittsburgh and you're like, yeah, Stevenson's pretty good, but like we were hitting the schneid here, and they're willing to give us, somebody we have, under team control for a while. Like, this is a small deal, and we can pull this off under the radar. Nobody will accuse us of tanking or whatever. Let's just trade Robert Stevenson over there. And then the Rays are like, nice. Now let's add 2 miles an hour to your breaking ball and stop throwing your four seam. Like, okay. Now he's awesome.
Yeah, the trade. I don't remember this trade. I just remember Stevens went to the Rays. Alika Williams went to the Pirates, and Williams was the 37th overall pick from the 2020 draft. And it didn't seem like a big deal at the time that they went ahead and flipped him. Looks like he has reached AAA both last season and now this season with the Pirates. So
It's taken him a while to get to above average WRC plus, and now that he's 24 and in AAA, he doesn't get any sort of age boost for it. But it is interesting that, he went from a number 93 WRC plus in Tampa to 126 WRC plus for Pittsburgh in AAA. So they must have seen something they really liked, and maybe they've, started to unlock that already.
yeah, looks like it's happening. 7 homers, 3 steals in just 36 games at AAA Indianapolis so far. Good slash line too, 305, 384, 531. So could be a trade that looks a little better for Pittsburgh once Williams gets up to the big leagues, but a nice addition to the Rays bullpen so far. I saw a graphic on MLB Network breaking down the series, looking at runs and starting pitchers, everything. And it was funny that the Orioles took 3 of 4 because if it were a head-to-head roto series, the Rays categorically were the better team in the series in like 6 out of the 8 categories on the screen. It's like, oh, that's pretty frustrating. Watching these two teams battle it out, and the Jays aren't going anywhere anytime soon, and maybe we'll see the Yankees with Judge close that gap. Maybe the Red Sox will still hang around. It's still going to be a great battle all the way to the end. Before we move off the Rays, Isak Paredes is reaching a level even above what I thought he could do. We liked him back during draft season. I don't think we were shy about that at all, but he is now tied for 23rd in position player WAR league wide. He's second only to Wander among the Rays position players so far this year. So that's going very right. So hopefully if you got him on your teams, you've been able to use him at a bunch of spots and you're reaping the benefits of this new level that Paredes has reached. But on the Orioles side, there's a lot of things about this organization that have changed under Mike Elias, the long rebuild, the quality of the prospects, the player development. And I think some of the things they've done with guys that didn't have significant prospect pedigrees has been really impressive too. It's something that the Astros did for a long time, and that's where a lot of that front office came from. So you look at a player like Ryan O'Hearn, that's a scrap heap sort of player. He ends up in Baltimore. He's taking time away from Ryan Mountcastle right now. When O'Hearn plays, mostly against righties, he hits cleanup. Like, what on earth did the Orioles see in Ryan O'Hearn that led them to take the chance and end up giving him this time that's now costing Mountcastle a good share of his job?
Yeah, I don't know that I've got a great example for you, but I would say that like somebody with an 111, max EV as O'Hearn has demonstrated, for 3 out of the 4 years in Kansas City, has good raw power. And you're looking at, decent ground ball rates. He's not hitting the ball like on the ground, 60% of the time, but one thing that does leap off the page is he used to hit fly balls at under 40%, well under 40%. It was like sort of 27% as in 2022 for Ryan O'Hearn in terms of fly balls in Kansas City, and it's 39.7% this year. So somehow they've managed to get him to lift the ball better. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. I mean, there can be a mechanical approach, and then there can be What happened with Paredes was that there was a swing decision approach, and I think you see some of that with O'Hearn, where if you look at his swing maps from last year and compare it to this year, he's not swinging at low balls as much. He's definitely not swinging on back foot sliders and stuff as much. And he's targeting balls in the upper half of the zone, and those balls go for better launch angles. So I bet you there's actually some sort of similarity between Ryan O'Hearn and Isaac Paredes, where it's like he's demonstrated a certain amount of ability to make contact and make powerful contact, and if we just change like what he's targeting in terms of what he's swinging at, that can actually change the quality of the balls he puts into play, and that's why he's having the best barrel rate, Ryan O'Hearn, since 2018.
Yeah, tons of hard contact, a 56.3% hard hit rate so far. And as you mentioned, best fly ball rate we've seen since he debuted. Ryan O'Hearn, when he debuted back in 2018, had a great stretch. It was 44 games, hit a dozen homers, hit 265 with a 353 OBP, 597 slug, and then came crashing down with a bigger opportunity in the year of the rabbit ball of all things, which was really kind of bizarre. But really good work in that front office, really digging up a guy that has turned into just a nice piece of their offense and has taken some of that pressure off of Mountcastle. We were looking before the show. Ryan Mountcastle's been brutal against right-handed pitching this year. His WRC plus is in the 40s right now, which is not normal for him. Usually he's a little above league average against same-handed pitching. It seems like a guy that could actually be flipped by the Orioles. There's still club control left. The depth chart's getting crowded. There's positional limitations there as well. And for a right-handed hitting player especially, that player becomes a lot harder to roster and play frequently when your team gets a lot better the way the Orioles have over these past couple seasons.
Yeah, there's a question of statistically, I can tell you that Ryan Mountcastle will be better against righties in the future. I mean, he's demonstrated, in all of his years before this one, that he's like sort of a 105 to 110 WRC plus guy against right-handers. So yeah, statistically, this is an anomaly this year that he's struggling so hard against righties. But, I pose that question to you, off air, that how long can the Orioles, as they try to win their division, stare at his numbers against righties and say, well, statistically, he should be better soon? And your answer is, well, the answer is about 3 months.
About 3 months. He got hurt, came back, didn't have the same share of the playing time that he had when he got hurt.
I mean, yeah, what were the numbers you had on how often he started since he came back?
He's been back for 10 games, and he's started 5. So, I mean, he's gone from what looked like a 90+% share of playing time to begin the season to 50-ish in these last 10 days since the break.
Sign on that too.
Well, yeah, I mean, it starts against lefties and it's against some righties. It also depends on how well O'Hearn plays and then how healthy everybody is. But especially with the opportunity to upgrade this roster in the next 8 days, the playing time outlook is not good for Mountcastle unless he is part of a trade to go somewhere else. He's ideally on a team that can just say, it's fine, just run him out there. We know he's going to get to his 25, 30 home run power pretty easily. There's probably 40 home run power for Mountcastle in his peak season if he doesn't have competition for time.
Maybe. I mean, the Mount Baltimore was really devastating for Mountcastle, I think.
Yeah. I agree. I think that was a huge blow for him. I mean, the other part of all of this is how much of the Orioles' development success with the pitching, we've talked about Kyle Bradish a lot this year, Tyler Wells, how much of their ability to make those guys better comes back to that decision to change the dimensions of the ballpark. It's a percentage of their improvement. Is it a quarter? Is it half? Is it 3/4? Like, how much do you attribute to the home park being much more forgiving now than it used to be for pitchers?
I just think it's impossible to develop good pitchers when you throw them into the fire. And like every small mistake they make, it just gets blasted. I mean, Andrew Abbott aside, it doesn't surprise me that Hunter Green and Graham Ashcraft and other Cincinnati Reds pitchers that have seemed ready to go have struggled in the major leagues, because it's just like, confidence is so important to production and to command and to all sorts of things that if you just make one mistake, it gets blasted out, then are you going to throw that same pitch again? Are you going to try to be super fine? Are you going to try and dance around? Are you going to start walking guys? Are you going to, you know what I mean? Like there's all these like unintended consequences, or not necessarily intended, but it's just all these consequences of having a park that skews hitter friendly that I think, yes, I think not only can you look at their performance and say, oh, in the old park, those guys would have been worse. But also, it's just so much easier to develop wells better if every time he makes a mistake, it doesn't get blasted for a home run. You know what I mean? So there's like soft factors and hard factors. And I think that's why you've seen basically across the league, everyone's trying to make their parks more neutral.
Yeah. I think it makes sense that confidence is huge. Not having to have pinpoint command of everything all the time takes a little pressure off the pitching staff. The Kyle Bradish ceiling balloon just keeps adding helium, by the way. I just saw he's fourth in stuff plus league wide now with the minimum 50 innings pitched. He's behind two of the Reds that you mentioned, Ashcraft and Hunter Green are in the top three. Spencer Strider sandwiched in there at number two. And we talked about this before. Bradish does it with the excellent secondaries. He doesn't really have a good fastball, but everything else, slider, the curve,
And recently,
change it all good.
he's pushed that four seam fastball to 101 stuff plus, which doesn't sound great, but that's I think that's enough. You know what I mean? That's enough. I did struggle to see how hard I should push him in my rankings that came out on Friday, because I still had, um, let me see what the projection was on him. A 3.94 projected ERA, right around Hunter Green, actually, 3.88 for Hunter Green. And I think you had in this in the notes, Bradish's strikeout rate isn't plus plus.
No, it's not.
And that always makes me a little nervous. Like Hunter Green, the park makes me nervous. The size of his arsenal makes me nervous. But the 30.3 projected strikeout rate that I have for him does not make me nervous. Kyle Bradish, I've got a 24.2% projected strikeout rate. And ahead of him, the only players that had 24 or worse are Logan Webb and George Kirby. I mean, Logan Webb is a ground ball guy. George Kirby is, a savant when it comes to command. Eflin, another guy with like a bunch of different pitches. Sandy Alcantara, ground ball guy. And Max Fried, who, has always just outperformed my model. So I just put him ahead there. But I put Kyle Bradish at 31. I think it would have been fair to push him maybe ahead of Max Fried, ahead of Rodon. Joe Ryan has a poor projection and has been kind of taking a step back. So I think you could push Bradish all the way up to 26, 25. But when you get to 25 and 26, I've got Sandy Alcantara and Jesus Luzardo there. I'm not out on Sandy Alcantara yet, and Jesus Luzardo has been great. Like, how much further could you push Kyle Bradish than that?
I don't think you can go a whole lot higher than that. I think the mid-range SP2 for a 15-team league is about as high as you can go unless he finds a way to miss more bats. That's the ceiling for the guys that land in this range. Yeah, it's a huge part of our game. I think it's interesting. 22.6% K rate during the past calendar year now for Bradish. So again, acceptable, but a long window with this improvement where he hasn't shown more than kind of an average ability in that particular area. You mentioned Luzardo. I couldn't put Bradish ahead of Luzardo, and I think the biggest knock on Jesus Luzardo for a long time, aside from in-game effectiveness and consistency, was his ability to stay healthy. In the past calendar year, Luzardo's in the top 20 now for innings pitched. It's like 190 plus innings. It's a 3.15 ERA. It's a 109 WHIP, and he is ninth in K minus BB percentage. So I think if you look in that range, you say, who would you consider pushing up, or who could still take another leap and become maybe a top 15 starting pitcher between now and the end of the season? I think Jesus Luzardo is showing us all the things we need to see to be capable of making that leap.
Yeah, and I do think there's some research that I want to do this offseason that is relevant to Christian Javier and maybe Jesus Luzardo, which is that I do think that there are fastballs that are precarious. And so, I think that there are certain fastballs you can take a mile an hour of velocity away from and they'll still be fine. And then there are certain fastballs you take a mile an hour off of the velocity, and they totally fall apart. So I think Javier's been showing that he's kind of in that category where the tick and maybe a little bit of change to the release point, and it's just been an awful fastball all of a sudden. Where I get a little sense of that with Luzardo, because you remember he was down a tick in Oakland, and he was getting blasted, really. I mean, it was not good in Oakland. And then the major change in Miami has not been a change of shape or even pitch mix. It's been he's been throwing harder in Miami. So I do wonder if it's a precarious fastball. I do wonder if he's less of a dynasty asset than he is certainly first appears. But in terms of this season, nothing I'm doing there. I'm going off the run down a little bit here, but we did just talk about three teams now: the Marlins, the Orioles, and the Rays, that I do expect to be active at the deadline. And we can do more of a deadliney, type show at some point. But most of the time we focus on players that are traded away. So Trevor May gets traded away from the Athletics. Who's closing? I think maybe Lucas Urseg, but that's the kind of conversation we're used to. Are there any players on the Orioles, the Marlins, or the Rays that you think are a risk because of the deadline?
Mm.
So I guess that something like I think maybe Tanner Scott is becoming the closer in Miami. But do you think like Jordan Hicks closes over Tanner Scott if he comes to town? I think maybe, yeah.
Probably, yeah.
Do you see how about in the Marlins or the Rays or the Orioles lineup somebody that could really lose their spot? I think Mountcastle, we just sort of talked about how that might be happening anyway. What would they acquire in the lineup that might just be a slugger that can play first or DH or something, right? So
I got a name for you from the
I don't know
Rays.
if they're going to get any. Do you think they're going to any hitters in Baltimore? I don't think they need a hitter.
No, I don't think they're getting a hitter. I
No,
think
I think it's got to be pitching.
I think we sort of have that solved already with the first part of the conversation. Like Mountcastle is already experiencing it, and it gets worse if he doesn't get traded.
Yeah.
I think the best player from who's been good from a roto perspective so far that could be a problem in the final 2 months might be in the Tampa Bay outfield, Josh Lowe, because we've seen him sort of take a step back in the last 30 days. The K rate's well above 30% again. And yeah, even though he banked you 13 homers and 21 steals, and the surface numbers for the season are still pretty good, they may be positioned to keep playing him in that part-time role, or even play him a little less than that, depending on what happens at the deadline. They're always active. I wonder if he's actually more susceptible to losing time than a typical player who has put up numbers like that over basically a half season. He's played 83 games this year. You wouldn't normally look at a guy on a 20, like a 26-40 pace and say, I'm worried about his playing time, but they already use him as a big side platoon guy. Could his playing time actually drop off a little more?
Yeah, I wonder I think they'll probably get him in there against most righties, but if you might run into situations where there's an opener and he's a lefty opener, and then you're in a daily league, and is Josh Lowe starting today, or is he not, or is he just not starting for the first inning and then he's going to come in the second inning? There might be some uncomfortable things there. And as much as, again, with Mountcastle, I would say I don't think he's a true talent 72 WRC plus guy against lefties. The Rays don't care because they have Manny Margot. They have other guys that are righties that can do better than whatever the true talent number is. And there's just the fact of the matter, Josh Lowe is striking out 40% of the time against lefties. So he's just not going to get in there against lefties. And, maybe there's opener stuff or just funky things where, or he has he's had problems against this one type of pitch with this type of movement. And they say, well, the starter tonight has that type of movement. So we're going to, a great changeup, right? Righty with a great changeup. Maybe he's not great against Grayson Rodriguez types because it's going away from him. So maybe they sit him even against somebody like that. So, yeah, I could see that. I could see that. In the craziest of scenarios, Lowe is like, goes for Ohtani or something.
Part of the package. Yeah. I mean, that could,
I don't know. I think Ohtani stays.
I don't think he goes to Tampa Bay, as fun as that would be. I don't know. I wonder if the team, if he gets traded, if the team that trades for him has to be one of the teams that would actually consider also signing him. I mean, it takes away a lot of the sting if you also get the long-term deal done. Yeah, you're giving up a lot of long-term talent for a guy that's only going to be on the roster for 2+ months, but you may win a World Series because of it. And then if you extend him, you don't feel quite as bad about giving up 4, 5, 6 future big leaguers potentially to get him.
What was the deal about Mookie Betts when he was traded to the Dodgers?
At the time, it was believed that Mookie Betts, or at least I think it was reported, that he didn't want to sign an extension with Boston.
And he had like one more year of team control, and they had him for that postseason, and then I think in the next offseason with 1 year left, they extended him.
Yeah, forget the exact timing of that extension offhand, but
I don't know. I don't know with Ohtani that all that stuff matters. I feel like he wants to go to free agency. I feel like for him, it's felt like a long time coming.
Sure, yeah.
And I think just reading from, we know for a fact that when he was deciding between the Angels and all these other teams, that there was no monetary aspect to it because they could all offer him the same amount of money. And so we know that he chose his last thing off of soft factors. I have a feeling that this next choice for him will be a hard factor, money. I mean, I think money will be a big part of it, and the second part of it is how much tech and data and like how progressive are your coaching techniques. And I think you can sell them on that anytime.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the benefit, the silver lining, if you don't get him, well, guess what? He's a free agent, like you said. He's going to test the waters. But I do think there's something to getting a few months to get him in your organization, show him the new city, if it's a new city, if he's actually, I mean, look, Anaheim and Los Angeles, not the same city. I lived in California long enough, even though I was in the other part of the state. I've always understood they are not the same city. They're actually very different.
The one team that in this way strikes me is like I could, just a little bit of a siren song here, and I'm not sure if it's real or not, but San Francisco, like if he doesn't come and play with you for a little bit, and he's just looking at San Francisco from the outside, he might think, well, the taxes are high. Who's really that good on that team? That sort of deal. But maybe if you got him in there and he was there every day, he would see, oh, they have 15 coaches. They have like they're like, trying to get the most out of these players every day. And that's why, despite the fact that you're not sure who the best player on the Giants is, they usually do better than you expect. I mean, I think at this point we can say that kind of about the Giants. They had one bad year, and in all the other years they've been better than you thought they'd be.
Yeah, constantly making me look dumb, but I
oh well, you got CJ Abrams.
So far, so good on that call. Before I move on completely from that past calendar year leaderboard, by the way, the other thing that really caught my eye, just looking at some of the numbers, Bailey Ober has a sub-3 ERA and a sub-1 WHIP over the past calendar year. It's over 100 innings pitched too. So, you talk about players that have exceeded expectations in a pretty big way. I would say Bailey Ober is one of them. It's interesting looking at where your last set of rankings had him. He's in the 80s. He's at number 81. I think there's a case for him to at least be in that 50 or so range, because that would put him up next to the Bassetts and Alex Cobb. I could see Bailey Ober outperforming those guys pretty. I
know. I've just got an 82 stuff plus, and you can see why he's ranked where he is, because of our projections on him. With an 82 stuff plus, we've got a 4.8 projection and a 22% strikeout rate. I actually have him higher than those things would suggest. Like, he's right next to Andrew Abbott, the other guy, where I'm like, maybe the model's wrong. I don't know. I wouldn't say that there's so much sample that I want to not look at the model at all, but I've also pushed those guys higher than guys that the model really likes, that, like the model, for some reason, Stuff Plus loves JP France and Nick Pivetta. I'm gonna have Bailey Ober ahead of JP France and Nick Pivetta. So, I am reasonable in that regard, but I have a hard time pushing him all the way up to 50 when the numbers that I trust, are spitting this out. So I do admit that there are things that possibly missing. He's when I watch Bailey Ober, I think what's strange is he's so tall and he throws from like a lower slot actually. Given his height. So I wonder if I should have like a height adjusted release point in my model instead of just a raw release point. That's what I think of when I look at Bailey Ober.
Yeah, I mean, the extension, just looking at the extension numbers on StatCast, Bailey Ober's 4-seamer extension 7.4.
Yeah.
That's actually up from last year. He was at 7 even.
And that should be in there. The extension is pretty important in the model, but I don't get it. Ober's maybe I should have just pushed him up. It would have looked really weird on the thing though to have a guy projected for 4.8 ERA in the 50s, but
yeah.
I mean, if you are asking like now that I'm looking, I mean, I would rather have I think I'd rather have Edward Cabrera than Bailey Ober. But I've got Jordan Montgomery up there. I guess that's, maybe I'd rather have Bailey Ober. I'd rather have Grayson Rodriguez, who I have at 60 over Bailey Ober myself.
Yeah, I think Grayson has the up arrow next to his name at this point.
Lance Lynn, though, my projections for him are 4.06 ERA.
It's the opposite. You look at that projection and it's like, wait a minute. Low. That seems too low, right?
That's too nice, yeah. Yeah.
Why do I want projections to be like
near to each other? Because I'm like, I don't get either of these numbers.
I just want projections to be like making chili, where you can just keep tweaking it. You can just keep adjusting it to your liking. Add, adjust here. Just change it. Yeah. Just
I have
throw some
Alex
more
Cobb.
paprika in
Alex
there.
Cobb has a 3.89 projected rest of season ERA, and I've got him 53rd, even though there's a bunch of 4s ahead of him. And it's just partially because he doesn't go deep into games, and I don't know about wins, and his team does weird things with him. And also, that's like a 3.89 ERA where it's like 3.7 at home, but 4.2 on the road. You know what I mean? It's like, can I use him all the time or not? And so if I can't use him all the time, then it doesn't matter what the aggregate number is. I'm going to have to put him in among the players that are sometimes on my bench and sometimes in my lineup. And so then it doesn't make sense for me to have him in the 40s. Like, would I rather have Yuri Perez or Alex Cobb? That's pretty obvious to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, somebody asked, like, when looking at my rankings, I've got Tyler Wells, Kutter Crawford, James Paxton, Garrett Whitlock, Andrew Abbott, and Bailey Ober. They're all through 70 through 80, and they're like, man, your model spit this out and they're all doing really well. Like, is there, like, what's your model missing on these guys? And I'm like, well, you have to distinguish between what the model does and then I'm a subjective ranker on top of it. So the reason all those players are together is because I lumped them there. I put them there because I said, this is where I'm going to put all the people I don't understand, basically. and so, like, I want to reflect the fact that they're still draftable, and if they're on your free agency, and the 75th starting pitcher in your league matters, then they should be owned. So I'm not saying don't own them, but I'm also saying, I prefer these other pitchers ahead of them.
So we had a question that came in about Kutter Crawford, so I'm kind of glad he came up as part of the conversation organically. We tried to answer this on a previous episode and one of the microphones broke, so that was a lot of fun. Kurt's question was, we'd be very interested in hearing our thoughts on Kutter Crawford. 3 throws, 5 pitches, 3 are above average by Stuff Plus. The thing that jumps off the page is the 4-seam Stuff Plus at 116. It's the 16th best 4-seamer if you look at pitchers with a minimum of 50 innings pitched so far this season, which Kurt thought was interesting, just given that Kutter Crawford doesn't throw particularly hard. Results so far are good, but somewhat underwhelming. Is this a guy that's just waiting to break out? This was from a couple of weeks ago. He's pitched pretty well in the time since. He's a little older for his service time, but in a dynasty context, that doesn't scare me. Seems like a low mileage arm. So please talk me out of giving up too much to go and get Kutter in my super deep 20-person hold 28 dynasty league.
Yeah. So in the meantime, Cutter Crawford's fastball has really fallen off. He's lost a significant amount of ride on the fastball. I think it's partially because, this is a guy who's kind of in between starting and relieving. And, when we first saw him, he's thrown 96s with this great vertical movement on his four seam, and he's doing it in smaller outings. And now we're asking him to do bigger outings. And he's gone from having, this plus ride to losing. In the course of the last 5 starts, he's lost a half inch to an inch of ride on his fastball, and that has been reflected in the stuff plus. So now it's down to a 93 stuff plus on the four seam. But I believe in the cutter, I believe in the slider, and I think the splitter is good enough. So what I see is a guy a little bit like Tyler Wells. When Tyler Wells first came up, it was, I need to throw my best stuff, plus or best stuff with a small s, for 5 innings. And, and that's the best way I can go forward. This year, what we've seen from Tyler Wells is, okay, my stuff plus is going to go down because I'm going to throw some pitches that, aren't my best stuff plus pitches, but they fit together and they help me turn the lineup over and they get me to the 6th inning. And I had the exact same conversation with Clark Schmidt where he was like, dude, like, yeah, I understand that, this pitcher, this pitch is not as great by stuff plus, but I can't, like, what did you see out of Clark Schmidt early in the season? 3 innings, great. 4th and 5th inning, what just happened? Graham Ashcraft, what do you see out of him? 3 innings, great. I've watched so many Graham Ashcraft starts. The first 3 innings, I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. And then the 4th inning, you're like, oh, wait a second. And then the 5th inning, you're like, God, nah. So I think what you were seeing out of Cutter Crawford is he's transitioning from like that he's doing the same thing that Clark Schmidt and Tyler Wells are doing, which is, taking the promise of that really good cutter and that really good slider, and finding other pitches and ways to like sort of mix them all together. Of those 3 pitchers, I probably like Cutter Crawford the least. Do you have if you were going to rank those 3 pitchers, how would you rank them?
That was Crawford,
Schmidt,
Wells,
and Wells. Do you see something similar with them, where it's like they're kind of like they've had some things that we've liked about them in the past, and now they're like put them together in a different sort of format?
Yeah, I think Schmidt for me is just like a half notch above. If they're in the same tier, like Schmidt's kind of the guy that I want the most because he's always had a little more of ceiling. Wells versus Crawford, I mean, it's going very well for Tyler Wells so far. The similarities with these guys, I think, are that Cutter Crawford has had a home run problem going back to Double-A, and he was old for the level. I don't think it's going away. There's no indication that his true talent includes a low home run rate, and that's exactly the problem with Tyler Wells. But you get away with it if you don't walk a lot of guys, and that describes Cutter Crawford as well. Having enough pitches to work with, we could go through the rest of this season. Crawford could stay in the rotation, get the innings up pretty high, come back next year, and be more prepared as a starter as a result of what he did this year. Very similar to Wells. We could see very good ratios. We could see maybe the ERA being a little higher than you expect for a really good whip. That happens a lot with the guys that have higher home run rates.
Inconsistent strikeout rates from both.
Yeah. Some starts he's going to go out there and he's going to miss a ton of bats. Other days he's going to go out there for 5 or 6 innings, and maybe the cutter is the pitch that's working for him. He's not getting whiffs with it. He's getting weak contact, but he's efficient and he pitches pretty well. I think he's kind of like a typical like good number 4 real life starter, and those guys on good teams tend to be a little undervalued from a fantasy perspective because their ceilings are somewhat limited.
But they can get you wins. At least they're on a good team and they're not in Oakland. Like the same pitcher in Oakland is like maybe unrosterable, even though he has a better home park. I would say that the Wells home park nudges me a little bit ahead. I
Sure.
just wrote a piece today about the mounds across baseball, and I'd never thought of this before, but the one mound that did come up as being a bad mound, quote unquote, more than once was Boston.
Mm.
And so I think the piece was all about how we can't be sure about this because we're not actually out there measuring these mounds. And then also that there were some comments from different players about how much of it is already sort of mental. And so I think that Boston intimidates pitchers because not only is the monster so close, that turns some outs into hits, but the dimensions, the way that the park feels, I think most of the pitchers were talking about how it feels small.
Mm. You feel like
So
everything's on top of you.
yeah, and so I think you just feel like if I give up a hit, if I give up a ball in play, it's going to be a smash. So I think Boston's an underrated tough place to pitch. And so Cutter's like figuring it out, but I think he'll have some bad days in Boston as well.
Thanks a lot for that question. It's a good one from Kurt. Let's get to another question that came in. This one came in from Andy. Andy wanted to know with Paul Skenes, Andy recently read that Skenes would switch locations on the rubber depending on the handedness of the batter. Is this a common practice? It makes sense to get the optimal angle for the batter you're facing, but seems to be incredibly difficult. Is there anyone else that does this? Thanks as always, and go Brewers. That's what I just read what the email says. I don't editorialize the emails.
Well, it's a tough query to to figure that one out because you have to do like maybe standard deviations of pitch release points and stuff. But I can say that this is absolutely important, and in fact, sort of foundational disagreement or argument within analytic circles about release point and if it should be in Stuff Plus and where release point information should reside. And so if you think about it, release point's super important in Stuff Plus, and that's because of the angle that the pitch is coming in. So the vertical angle, the vertical release point is super important for the vertical angle. We understand that, but the horizontal is also important for the horizontal angle because you can, like Max Scherzer throws, far to the right to the third base side. So if he throws a slider to a righty, it looks like it has even more horizontal movement because it's coming from way out there. He's manipulating that. So but the part that's like become a question among analysts is that stuff, because it is important to outcomes, but is it stuff? And so, one analyst asked me if I move to the left or right on the mound, my stuff is better? Like, why is my stuff better? I just moved on the mound. And I would say, well, that's still the starting point of your pitches. And I would say that hitters say his stuff is so much better from that side of the mound. You can read that two ways, though.
Mm.
His stuff is so much better from that side of the mound. His stuff is just playing better for that side of the mound. In any case, release point matters. Release point angles matter. Changing your spot on the release point on the rubber matters. I've looked around at who has changed their release points the most, their horizontal release points the most over the course of the season. Brandon Pfaadt is probably number one. He didn't show up in my query because of how I did it, but Brandon Pfaadt has moved almost 2 inches on the rubber since he came back, and it looked really good there in Cincinnati for 5 innings again.
It's only been 7 starts this year for Brandon Pfaadt at the big league level. It feels like it's been twice as many given how frustrated we've been by him.
Yeah, it's been in our minds. Other people who've changed their release point. Shaman I was just talking to me about moving basically the heat map a little bit, and so he's moved 1.5 inches. And another one that's changed a lot is Alek Manoah and Jose Barrios have both changed their spots on the mound a significant amount since the beginning of the season. So I think Manoah is basically trying to find some of that horizontal movement that he's lost on the slider and trying to find it in moving on the mound and just making it look like there's more horizontal movement. by where he is on the mound? I think it's a great question. It leads to many more questions, like good questions usually do. And I haven't answered anything for you. But if you do look at a certain pitcher and their horizontal release point has changed a lot, like go look at Brandon Fott's page on Brooks Baseball or on Savant, you can see their release point. When you see a big change like that, I would circle that point and look at results around it before and after, because I think it is a fundamental change.
Yeah, and I think the vision that I had when this question came in was RBI baseball for NES. You move your pitcher side to side, you move your batters in the box, and you whatever you wanted to do, you could just give different looks that way. I don't know if anyone's like that extreme where they're sliding from all the way to the extreme third base side, all the way to the first base side, because that's very hard to do. You're changing a lot about where you're starting if you do that.
You have to have some good natural command, I think, to some extent, because then you're just looking at it totally differently.
I think it'd be subtle. It'd be half of the rubber at most, like that within. I don't think I can't. I've never actually looked closely enough at a pitcher's feet in a plate appearance. I've never looked for this before, even though it could be there.
3 inches, sometimes 3 inches. Sometimes people are just a little bit more this way, a little bit more that way. The extremes of both sides. Yeah, that is rare.
I think sometimes the more the larger the wholesale adjustments you see are like off-season adjustments, saying, okay, I'm like a reliever. I think Fernando Rodney was one that when the Rays had Fernando Rodney, and he had that amazing season. If I remember correctly, they moved him all the way over to the first base side of the rubber as a righty. So sometimes it's like changing it all completely and just going with the new spot, and that unlocks some things. But it's not necessarily, I'm here for one pitch, I'm over there for the next one, and then I'm back over here, because that's just not
that
something
would start
that
telegraphing pitches too.
Yeah, you'd have to have a lot of different looks that keep hitters guessing. Otherwise, they'd be able to figure out exactly what you're doing if it's, just telegraphed that way. But thanks a lot for that question, Andy. A couple more to get to before we go. Mark wanted to know, is Alek Thomas fixed? It looks like the Diamondbacks opened his stance, modified the leg kick. Early returns look promising. Was hoping to discuss these adjustments and any evidence you see in exit velocity, launch angle, etc. So what do you see since Alek Thomas returned to the D-backs? I believe that was in June when he came back onto the roster.
Well, one thing that was going horribly bad for him in May was he had 24 batted balls in May before he was sent down, and he had a minus 12-degree launch angle on those balls. So he was just really smashing the ball on the ground. And if you look at his history, this has been a problem over his career. I was a little surprised that this didn't register in my head when I was evaluating him as a prospect before. I think it's as he moved towards Arizona, the ground balls got a little better. There's that AAA 2021 where he had a 50% ground ball rate. And I said, okay, this guy can do it. He's got a good strikeout rate, good walk rate, good speed, good power. He's increasing his fly ball rate. That's not what happened. He has, since that moment, Alek Thomas in 2022 and 2023 has a combined ground ball rate north of 56%. So this is a problem. He went down, and he's lifting the ball a little better now in terms of monthly launch angles. It was minus 2.9 in June and back up to 5.5 in July. So he is managing to at least hit line drives, hit the ball in the air a little bit more. And I think that is good for him long term. But in terms of projections and in terms of like his yearly ground ball rate, it's still 56%. He still hits the ball on the ground too much. He doesn't have, like Ellie De La Cruz hits the ball on the ground too much. Ellie De La Cruz hits the ball 120 miles an hour. Same for O'Neal Cruz. Other guys, there's some guys who hit the ball on the ground too much. But I spent way too long telling you how great Ke'Bryan Hayes is going to be to jump on to Ke'Bryan Hayes Part 2 here. It's
a little bit like Alex Verdugo. Similar kind of profile. Verdugo had a slightly lower ground ball percentage and a better strikeout rate. I think the other thing I would wonder about with a player like Thomas hard hit rate's up a little bit this year. I like what we're seeing there. He's always shown that patience. If he's hitting a ground ball instead of striking out, is that it's still a better outcome because you could still get a hit on a ground ball. It's not the optimal gonna hit a home run sort of outcome. But I wonder if we can be too quick to dismiss Brian Hayes is a good example of all he has to do is make one adjustment and he's there. But are we too quick to dismiss this in the face of someone who's done a good job tempering strikeouts? Because if the cost of not striking out more is hitting the ball on the ground, you'll take that as the trade-off. You'll say, okay, fine. Maybe let's say 10% of that ground ball rate comes from pitches that you would have struck out on, but he's got a good enough hit tool to at least put it in play.
More likely to put up a better batting average.
Mm-hmm.
I would also think that it's a little unfair to Alek Thomas to throw Brian Hayes on him with 600 plate appearances. So, if he does this, if he does everything he's doing right now for a full year next year, I think I'd be fully out. Right now, I'm just stuck in this weird limbo where I don't want to take away the promise of a young player, that especially one that makes good contact. But I just keep staring a hole into that ground ball rate.
Hey, you know what? Brian Hayes down to a 43.4% ground ball rate. That's down from 49.4% last year, down from 56.7% back in the year of the rabbit ball. Maybe it's happening.
You don't have to tell me. I just keep staring a hole into his page, just being like, "Hey, this is exactly what I wanted out of him." One of the better barrel rates, one of the best, the lowest ground ball rates for Hayes, and it's all there. And of course, he hurts his back.
Yeah, the projections now from the BatX have him as a league average hitter the rest of the way: 268, 325, 410. So slowly but surely, maybe it is in fact happening.
I see a lot of similarities here with Alek Thomas, actually. Now that I'm looking, I just had the pages up in both of them. Don't you think?
Good defenders, both of them. So playing time, pretty stable.
That does help them stay on the field.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that question, Mark. Last question for today. This one came from John. It came in about 3 weeks ago when Emmanuel Clase was in the midst of a pretty rough stretch. He gave up runs in 3 consecutive appearances, and we got this email from John that read, "He's become unusable in the short term. Ground balls down, fly balls up, hard hit rate up, walk rate up, velocity down. Any suggestions about what side of the plank I should jump from? Seriously, your thoughts." Yeah, don't jump from the plank. Not a good idea. The water hurts. Bad idea. No direction is a good one. Don't get on the plank in the first place. Since then, Clase has settled down again. And I keep looking at Clase, I keep saying nothing's wrong. And part of it's that I'm probably am overcorrecting in my head for how safe I think his hold on the job is. Emmanuel Clase signed a very team-friendly extension through 2026 before he was even arbitration eligible. There are club options up through 2028. So we're talking about a guy that could be a 10-year closer potentially. It's a short list of players that you could look at like that. Even when we dug into him maybe a month or so ago, it was kind of the usual story. The K rate's not that great relative to how good his actual stuff is, and the ERA is a little high compared to the norms. I'm still very optimistic about Clase. If you're in a keeper or a dynasty league, he's still one of the safest relievers you could actually go trade for, because even though he's not going to rack up 30, 35% K rates every year, I think he's become one of the absolute safest players for 30 plus saves on an annual basis.
I think Doval is a comp for me, and one thing that's interesting for both of them is that they're being used pretty heavily.
Mm-hmm.
Doval had 67 and a half, 67 and 2/3 innings last year. He's at 45 already this year, and similar kind of 99 with cut kind of profile. Doval's velocity is still going up, though. The difference for Clase is that Clase's velo has started the decline. It's 98.8, so it's I'm not saying it's bad, but I just I think it just points to I wouldn't like in a keep six situation. I almost never keep a closer, even if it's Clase, because they're too tied to their velo, and I just wonder, like at 97-1, what does Clase look like? So
He's only given up 2 homers so far this yeyear.
And he's done that forever. He's suppressed that. He's had great ground ball rates. This is one of his worst, but he's still, 63% for his career. So
I guess my only thought as far as like what could make him better and maybe what could be his adjustment if he loses another tick on the fastball, be that, next year or the year after.
Add another pitch or something.
Could he just throw his slider more? His slider gets plenty of whiffs. It seems like a pretty good slider. I mean, just go to the slider more often. And
40% or 50-50, yeah.
Yeah, I think a cutter at 97 with a slider that he's throwing 40 to 50% of the time might lead to the same results or maybe even better, maybe more swings and misses.
Yeah.
And more
maybe
strikeouts.
More homers or whatever, but maybe more strikeouts.
Yeah, so I think as frustrating as that recent stretch was, and even though this hasn't been exactly what you signed up for Emmanuel Clase.
I'm not worried about him this year. I'm not even necessarily worried about him next year. This is more a conversation about like within that whole contract and what his career is going to look like.
Yeah, I think we're still 2 or 3 years away from really being worried about him. If you want to slide him back to the bottom of tier 1, top of tier 2 among closers, he's still pretty firmly in that circle of trust for me.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that question, John. Hopefully you didn't get off the plank. Probably got off safely, at least, since we waited a little while to answer that email. If you got a question for a future show, you can send those our way, ratesandbarrels@gmail.com. You can also drop a comment under this video on YouTube. I'm finally back to the point where I can check on those a bit more again now that I'm getting settled back in. On Twitter, you can find Eno at EnoSaris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. If you don't have a subscription to The Athletic, you want to check out Eno's latest rankings, all of the great stuff we've got going on the site right now. Women's World Cup is happening. $2 a month gets you in the door at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. It's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.